Jeff Petriello is Director of Creative Development and part of the leadership team at Mashable Studios. He will share with us how to handle both minor and major obstacles when running a very creative team. Welcome, Jeff Petriello.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if anyone else here is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, but that was my dream for years. So thank you to everyone. I am getting over a little bit of a cold, so I don't normally sound this raspy, but some people told me it sounds pretty good, so I'm just going to go with it for now. This is actually my first time in Sweden, so thank you all for having me. They almost didn't let me into the country because my passport expires in 40 days, which is something I learned on the way here. So shout out to Norwegian Air for working that out. But yeah, seriously, thank you to everyone at Internet World and for you all for attending, and especially to Lexi, who's presentation actually has a lot to do with what I'm going to speak about today. A lot of those same sort of programs we use at Mashable, and just the general sense that when your internal team is optimized and communicative, you're going to be the best you can be. And I'm going to touch upon some, specific things that you can do to make sure you're running at that level of efficiency in regards to working with a creative team. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about what Mashable is. Does anyone here know Mashable or read it or watch our videos? Okay, cool, sweet. So some of that will be redundant for you, but I won't spend too much time on it. But just to give you a little context into what world I'm working in, what types of creatives we have on the team, so you all are on the same page with me. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do, which is sometimes difficult to explain, but it's really fun, and I'll get into that later. And then the meat of the topic here, which is how to manage a creative team. And I am going to slant it a bit to a younger creative team. Most of the creatives that we have at Mashable, you could term millennials, just don't call them that to their face. But a lot of the problems that we've faced are particular, I think, to dealing with people who are just starting out, getting out of college. Maybe this is their second or third job. They're really talented, but they might not be used to working in a larger corporation. And getting them used to that environment can be really difficult, especially if they're coming from East Brooklyn, just having produced like 1 million warehouse shows and not knowing how to do a presentation like this. So there's a lot of things to learn. And then we'll have a Q&A. So I know out there you all have phones, you all have tablets. I do see some paper and pencil. I don't know what you're doing with that, but please feel free to tweet. I think the hashtag is just Webbdagarna, right? I would love to answer your questions. I really do think that can be the most helpful thing at conferences, so do not be shy. Yeah, and that's basically it. So, Mashable. We're a news media site. We've been around for a little over 10 years, but really, this general statement, where tech meets culture, that's where our heart and soul lives. So, it started out as a personal blog. Our founder and CEO, Pete Cashmore, from Scotland, started literally like a little tiny blog that was an outsider's perspective on what was going on in Silicon Valley in the mid-2000s. It got a lot of attention because it didn't have a lot of the BS that some of the larger publications at the time were writing about, and it was an approachable, easy way for people who were interested in the beginnings of social media and Silicon Valley to access that information and begin to understand it. Now we're a global media company with hundreds of employees all across the world. London's our closest office to here. If you're ever there, stop by. They're really great. They're doing a lot of Facebook Live right now, so they're like eating weird things, and it'll be a good time to visit. But every story on Mashable aims to inform, inspire, and or entertain. So in relation to this particular presentation, you can think when we're interacting with our creatives, we're always having them go back to those core values of Mashable and asking ourselves, is what you're going to create, whether it's an animation or an article or a video. Is it achieving one of these three mission statements? And I think going back to what Lexi said about having strong internal comms, making sure everybody has these basic, like meta level values for your company, even if you're a company of 5 people or 500, is really important. So we always, I always like to throw this in your face, just like I throw it in their faces every single day. We always come back to these, and I think that's really important. We reach about 45 million people across the globe monthly. That doesn't even actually include Snapchat Discover, which is one of my favorite things. We have close to 30 million social followers. Twitter is really a huge place that Mashable blew up. So if you don't follow us there, go do it now, please. That would be great. And we also have over 2 billion social impressions monthly as well. So when you're thinking about what we're creating for and what we're asking people to do, a lot of it is new. I mean, a lot of the creatives that we have are coming out of traditional art programs. They're coming out of illustration classes. They're coming out of, maybe traditional animation or graphic design. They're still not teaching you how to make a Snapchat Discover Top Snap in art school. They're not doing that. So when we're bringing on people, it's really important that they do not have an ounce of cynicism about this entering into a place where they may have to be working on something that their mom might not take seriously. So that's something that you really have to look for when you're hiring creative talent, is that spirit of at least adventurousness, if not complete sort of geeky hype. Social's in our DNA. You can see our Instagram's up there, our Snapchat stories. We're Mashable everywhere. Feel free to follow it. 3 Mashable articles are shared every second, so it is really important that the creative that goes along with those articles is awesome and eye-grabbing. So this, again, is something that we're always going to come back to. And you can see we reach a really large audience. That map is relatively reflective of where our actual staff is. So you can see it's also really important to have people who understand the local trends and experiences to communicate these stories. This isn't even all of the places that Mashable is producing content for, but again, especially for my team, we're constantly thinking about a lot of the new emerging platforms that are popping up, it seems like every other week here. Facebook, Instagram, Periscope, Meerkat's a little... that one's gone already. But Facebook Live has certainly replaced it in the last few weeks. Twitter, Vine, Pinterest, Snapchat Discover, instant articles. It's like every time you turn around, there's something new. And that's why I think it's really important when we talk about creativity and we talk about hiring talent in this landscape that you concentrate on those core skills. One thing I always look out for when we're hiring new people is someone who says, oh, I'm like the world's best Instagrammer, or I'm the world's greatest Snapchat story creator. It's like, okay, that's fine. But like in the case with Meerkat, when that may or may not go away in a year, what else can you do? I'm looking for someone who's a really great photographer, who's a really great narrative storyteller, whether that's through writing, with pictures, video, whatever it is. There's these core fundamental creative skills that go across all of these emerging platforms. And it's really important, I think, both from a hiring and a managing perspective, that you concentrate on those, even with, a younger creative team. I always encourage, we have, for instance, I have a great associate producer named Tyler, who's one of his chief jobs is to manage our Instagram. And when I talk to him about it, I try to remove the sort of social media hype around that and talk to him about what makes a good photograph. Why is this communicating? How can you manage your relationships with other photographers we work with, and really concentrate this strategy and management team around those core creative skills, in that case, photography, or, at least relationships with photographers. And I think that not only helps to concentrate and make your content better, but it also helps from a career development perspective and to give people a little bit of a longer insight into, why am I doing this? Why am I spending my time working on this platform? You actually are gaining experience into skills that go back 100, 150 years and are going to be applicable moving forward. So I think it's always important to bring it back there. A little bit about what I do. So thanks to Google for this picture. It was at a conference. It was really cute. I'm a director of creative development. What the hell does that mean? It means a lot of things at Mashable. Essentially, when anything new pops up, I am tasked with sort of figuring out best practices, who should be working on it, what we can do to bring the Mashable voice to those platforms, and who should be responsible in the end moving forward once we implement a strategy. So that means I get to work with all types of awesome people. In general, our department is called Mashable Studios. So if you hear that in the press, moving forward, I'm a part of that team. But we are made up of all sorts of creatives. And here's just a few of them. We got animators, motion graphics designers, producers, videographers, photographers, experiential engineers. We do a lot of awesome live events. So we are a complete and total mishmash of all types of creative skills. And if you look back at that list of emerging platforms, you'll see that, I mean, if we looked at that 10 years ago, 3/4 of these skills might not be relevant. I always, a kid, whenever I speak to a room of, I do a lot of speaking to journalists because we, technically are a newsroom. And one of the things I always say to them is, if you're in school right now, or if you're talking to journalism students, learn After Effects. It's literally the #1 creative program we're using right now in our newsroom to communicate. And I think that that's something that completely has shifted over the last 10 years. Even if you go back 5 years ago, people would have said, learn Adobe Premiere, learn Final Cut, which is essential. That's kind of background now to learning After Effects. But it really does show that there are so many new creative skills that we as journalists or producers or managers are having to incorporate into our workflows and our teams that we might not have had experience with in the past. And that's as challenging for the leadership as it is for the actual creatives. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. And that's why it's really important that the things I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, you take the time to think about them and apply some of the tips hopefully I can give you today. I just want to show you some of the actual creative that this team has made. You'll see a little logo that comes up. It says Mashable Collective. That's what we used to be called. We're now Mashable Studios, so take that with a grain of salt. But you'll see kind of the breadth and depth of what we produce on a daily basis. So there was a lot of stuff in there. You saw video, you saw traditional animation, you saw 3D animation, you saw papercraft and stop motion animation and video and animation on top of video and Instagram. So you can imagine just the ridiculous requests that I have to fulfill every single day and ask this crew to produce. And they're amazing. And they do such a good job of it. So how do we do that? I think it's because we follow these 3 basic tenets. And I know these are kind of the most generic words I could possibly select for how you can better manage a creative team. But really, at the core, these three things, trust, collaboration, and feedback, are the foundation of everything that I do with our creatives at Mashable. This is in no order of preference. I think these are all pretty important, but I wanted to start with trust because without that, you're really not going to get much of the other two in the first place. So here we go. All right, trust. Why is trust important in managing a creative team? So one of the things that I think really differs when it comes to a creative team versus maybe a technical team or a leadership team or what have you, is that art is personal. I know it's difficult. What we want to say is like business is business. And there is truth to that when someone, criticizes what you've made or is critiquing what you've done. It's not a personal attack. We're just trying to achieve our goal together. It might be my job to give you that criticism. But at the end of the day, art is an expression of what we think, what's in our heads. And it's putting that on the outside of your body and having somebody look at it and tell you what they think about it is an extremely vulnerable place to be. So trust, or the acknowledgement that we have mutual respect for each other, is essential in a creative team because you need to be able to look at a video creator and say, you know what, this shot could have been better. You could have lit this a little bit differently and it would have been much more effective. Or, this cut was really great. You did a magnificent job lining up these shots, and have the same sort of interaction between those two comments. And that's not an easy thing to have. And that's why working with freelancers, they're going to have one set of experiences that prepares them for what they're going into, as opposed to an in-house team where you're really working day after day with a person one-on-one. Some days they're going to be on top of their game, and some days who knows what happened in their lives. But at the end of the day, they're still making something and showing that to you, which is a really vulnerable thing, in my opinion, to do. So I think it's really important, the creative team, that we respect that and we realize that it is a subjective game that we're playing here. It's not like a program where it's clear if there's bugs or not. When someone shows me something, it's my opinion whether or not that's effective or not. I can compare it to a list of things that I think are effective on social media or whatever platform I'm on. But at the end of the day, the best things always break those rules in the first place. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. One way that I establish trust with a lot of my team is goal setting. I know that sounds like really corporate, but I've found it to be incredibly effective for creating trust with my team. And what I mean by goal setting is creating actionable and scheduled paths for career development with your team. So say you have a video editor who's really interested or is really excited about everything the After Effects guys, the post-production effects guys you have on your team are doing, and they really want to learn some of that, even though that's not why you hired them. Speaking with them in a one-on-one, whether that's a weekly thing you do or a quarterly thing you do or even just a yearly thing you do, which is always really important to have those one-on-one moments, learning that that's something that they're interested in, and then setting out a reasonable path for them to acquire some of those skills goes a really long way in establishing trust with that creative member of your team, because what it says to them is, I recognize what you're interested in. I acknowledge the development that you personally are seeking in this position and that you currently have access to. And I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that we set up a system to track how you are achieving those goals. And that's what that does, is create basically a framework and a baseline of mutual cooperation that's going to benefit that creative team member. That's a really great base to work off of on a daily basis when you're asking them to edit the 4th sizzle reel that month. So I think that goes a really long way. And I would highly recommend that you think about creating writing them down and agreeing upon goals on a yearly and quarterly basis for your creative team members that go a little bit outside of what the daily grind is. It goes a long way. Respect. So this is kind of obvious. Respect is obviously essential to trust. One thing that we all know is you don't have to like every single person that you work with, but I do think you really do need to respect them. And that's definitely something in a creative team that we face all the time. Someone might really not like somebody else's style, or maybe they think they're kind of obnoxious or difficult to work with. These are things that as your company scales and grows are inevitable. And I think what it's really important to remember and to reinforce is that despite those personality differences or creative differences, we are on the same team here. And to explain to your creative team members that this is why this person is essential here, and this is why we really benefit from their skills and their particular method, but we need to be on the same page about how we respect each other and how we work from the same basis of respect to achieve our goal together despite those differences. And that's, there's only so much advice I can give you there because I think it really depends on the particular personalities that you have, but doing things like creating sort of icebreaker moments on a bi-weekly or quarterly basis with your team, or going out for drinks, or having people over for a holiday party. Just like basic things that we all talk about when we talk about team building can go a long way in creating this kind of respect. One thing that we also do in weekly or bi-weekly team meetings is show and tell, which I think actually, it sounds a little childish, but goes a long way into creating respect, because I literally ask a particular creative on my team, from entry-level production assistants all the way up to senior animators and art directors, to pick one piece of creative art, whether it's a YouTube video or a Vimeo video or a poem that they like, that they spend the first 10 minutes of our meeting introducing that piece of creative and talking about why they like it, why it's inspiring to them. And I think that goes a long way for people who might have some differences. You get a little bit of insight into what drives a person, what they really think creativity is, what they find to be effective and what they don't find to be effective. And I think that goes a long way to creating a little bit of respect, especially between people who, personally might not hang out ever if they weren't in this room together. And then the last bullet point here is psychological safety. This term, I was so happy to find it because it really pinpointed sort of a core value of my team that I didn't have a name for. But I actually read about it. There was this really great article in the New York Times Magazine a couple months ago that profiled this team at Google who was tasked, with codifying how to make a team more efficient working together. Their job was to literally test out all sorts of team building activities, different management methods, and by the numbers and with data, figure out what's the most effective way to manage a team and to get people to be productive together. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that article, but one thing I really walked away with from that, and was something that I fostered on my own team that I never could pinpoint, is this concept of psychological safety, which is the idea that when you are working with your team, there's no judgment. It's a safe place when it comes to creativity and creative ideas. You can say anything, obviously within reasonable limits. You can say anything that's helping to achieve the goal, and you're not going to be afraid of what your manager thinks, what your colleague thinks, what you're even going to think when you say that. And I think when you're in brainstorms, when you're in weekly, update meetings, having that kind of environment where people feel safe in saying even the seed of an idea. A lot of things that I always stop my team from saying is when someone says, I have a dumb idea. It's like, okay, yeah, we all have dumb ideas. Like I have them like 8,000 times a minute. But at the end of the day, there is no dumb idea in this room. Like no one thinks you're dumb. We hired you. We're paying you tens of thousands of dollars to work here. Like you better not be dumb. You know what I mean? Like that's not a great way to frame it. It's like, I have the start of an idea, or I have half an idea here, or I just want to throw something out and see, if you guys can help me build on it. Just changing that language goes a really long way in establishing this like safe place, which I think, you've read a million articles about the ethics of safe spaces and millennials, I'm sure, but there is something to that, to create a place where people do feel able and willing to say anything. I think goes such a long way and winds up producing much more beautiful creative products in the end, because we're asking people again to be vulnerable, and I think it's really important to remember that. So yeah, that's my little spiel on trust. It's really essential. And without that, you'll never be able to collaborate, which is kind of my next big point here. So collaboration is huge at Mashable, and I understand that not every single company has departments that are willing to work together or are instructed to work together. And I know there's a lot of different systems that we work within. So take this and try to frame it around whatever situation you're in and apply it. But for us, I'll tell you a little bit about what it means. And the first and biggest point here, I think, is this sense of interdisciplinary collaboration. So that's kind of on a micro and a macro level. Again, whatever's possible in your particular situation. For us, on a micro level, that means making sure that I go out of my way to look at who's working with who, what projects they've been working on, and actively mix that up. I think in a creative team, we can get into a lot of routines. We could get into a lot of situations where people are working with the same people. They feel like they're doing the same thing. And making sure you go out of your way to mix that up and encourage people to work with people they haven't before is really important. At Mashable, we also, in Mashable Studios, we have this thing called the pod system. We have to deliver a certain amount of like creative pitches every month. And so we're actually with people from outside our team. So I might be working with somebody who writes branded content articles and somebody who runs the server for media management, as well as like an animator and a graphics designer. And we all are tasked with working together and coming up with those creative pitches every month, which I think really goes a long way in getting you to think outside of your your safe box. So interdisciplinary collaboration, I think, is really, really important. And you do kind of have to force it sometimes, because people are not going to understand why they're sitting in a room with someone who literally has nothing to do with what they do on a daily basis. But we've seen a lot of great things come out of that. Informed by data. So this is sort of a tagline that you can apply to almost anything at Mashable, but making sure that everything you do when you collaborate has a background of science to it. So in this sense, for instance, like we will have, say we're tasked with coming up with some ideas about how to make, this just happened, like really engaging suite of creative pieces around sneakers. A new launch, like the Jordan 30s coming out this summer. We're like, what can we do for that, right? And coming into a brainstorm meeting, whether you assign it to someone else or you as a leader are doing it on your own, working with like your audience development team or your data team to come in and say, okay, this is some of the best performing pieces on the internet in the last year around sneaker launches or the Jordan or whatever keywords that you're following for this brainstorm, and to come in and provide that framework so people feel informed and they feel like their ideas either have a tie to that data and are therefore backed by it, or go so against the data that they're so proud of it and think it's going to just break all the rules. Either way, both of those situations are fine. But to have that context and to come into a collaborative environment prepared, I think is really important and something that we try to do all the time at Mashable. I also think that that ties into a little bit the preparation for your collaboration it ties into the fact that like not everyone creates in the same way. Not everyone collaborates in the same way. So for example, like I run into the problem where there's some people on my team that will dominate meetings no matter what. They'll just like go on for 45 minutes and create these incredible pitches, and it'll be great. We'll have like 3 full pages of ideas to work with. Meanwhile, there's 3 other people in the room who like piped up maybe to say, yeah, I think that's a good idea or not. And those people we hired for their ideas as well. And this was just not the environment for them to be able to contribute. So I think really taking a look at how your team interacts and noticing sort of those behavioral patterns with some people and trying to adjust for them goes a long way. So the next time we had a meeting, after, that was something that stuck out in my brain, I simply said, here's a really simple 3-question Google form. Shout out to Lexi, that you can fill. I want everyone to fill out before we come into this meeting, just to provide us with some basic ideas that we can work from. So that gives the opportunity for people who don't really like to speak publicly in meetings to contribute. It also allows people whose ideas form over time to be able to contribute as well, because there are some people who really just need a seed of inspiration, and they need some time for that seed to grow, whether it's a night of dreams. Literally, people will come in and be like, I dreamed this. It's crazy. Or some people are on the spot. You can say, come up with ideas for, what we can do around the anniversary of The Legend of Zelda. And they'll come up with 5 things right on the spot. There's just no, you really have to adjust for that. So I think it's really important to make those active changes to make sure everybody's contributing. And the last thing for collaboration is community inclusive. So at Mashable, we have a great amount of social followers, but we also have to constantly think how we can include them in that process. So we have things like our Follower Friday series and our Mash Picks Instagram handle that let us constantly learn who's contributing to us outside of our organization. And a lot of times that will lead us to partnerships and collaborations, whether it's around events or content pieces that we never would have thought of on our own. And if you have access to a community like that, I really suggest you think of how you can incorporate them into your collaborative process as well. Finally, feedback. Really important here is that it's bilateral. If you're constantly just asking people to tell you how you're doing, or constantly just telling people how you think they're doing, it's going to get old, and you're going to destroy that trust and respect that you have created. So making sure that for every time you give feedback, you're at least thinking about how you're going to receive that feedback as well is something that I think management tends to forget. So that's really important. And make sure it's varied and scheduled. Varied, I think, in type. So here, again, making sure that it might not just be oral feedback, but it could be written feedback, or even creative feedback. You can assign people to, create something in order to give their feedback for a given situation. So, keeping it so it's not just the same form every single time, and making sure that you let people know when they're gonna have that opportunity. You might not have time. The next project might be due the next day, and you don't really have time for that cycle of feedback, but going out of your way to say, hey, I understand that and I know that, and this is the time you're going to be able to have to talk about the issues that you have with what we just did, I think is really, really important. And then obviously making sure that feedback is actionable and someone is held accountable to following through with those actionable steps on that feedback is also really important. We use a software suite called Namely. That's an HR suite to do that, but there's all sorts of tools that you can use that I think it's really important that someone can go in and see when that feedback loop is going to be able to happen. So those are kind of the 3 pillars of team management, creative team management that we try at Mashable Studios. And here are just, again, some things that I think you should walk away with from this presentation that'll help you practice these things. One, with trust, is to practice being vulnerable yourself. So if you don't feel like you're revealing some part of you that you haven't revealed before to your team, or you're feeling like you haven't put yourself in a situation where you need to take a risk or you're unsure of something, then you're probably not doing that for your team. And if there's anything I learned, practicing that vulnerability is really what drives that trust and creates that within your team. So if you haven't felt that way, chances are your team hasn't. So think about ways that you can do that, whether it's icebreakers or assigning people to work outside of their skill set when you have a little extra time. Collaboration, demand time for experimentation. So I know it can be really difficult to set aside time that's not directly productive to a project that you're working on, especially in our industry, but I think it is essential. One example that I use to this is that there was a day that I was out and left my team to their own devices. And I came back and found out that my art director and my senior animator spent the entire day literally futzing around with this projection program that I had no idea about. And I came back and I was kind of angry. I was like, you guys didn't work on anything I told you to work on. And then they showed me what they did. And it was this beautiful projection mapping of this animation that we had created. And we wound up using that technology and that test in like 3 events that year. And they never would have been able to do that if they hadn't taken that time to experiment and show me. So from that day forward, I always made sure to set up those kind of days where you're allowed to try something new and you're allowed to take that time. And so many fruitful productive things have come out of it. I can't even tell you. So I think that's really important. And then finally, feedback. Go outside of your comfort zone and try one new form of that, whether it's a questionnaire or group feedback setting or something. Just make sure you try something new. And I think we're running out of time here, so I'll take any questions that you guys have. But thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Jeff. I think we'll have to take the questions afterwards if you just
Okay,
hang
sure, no
around
problem.
for a
Yeah.
while. I think there are questions, but just one quick question. Do you think it's easier to manage a non-creative team?
No, I don't think it's easy to manage any sort of team. I just think there's particular things when it comes to creatives that you want to pay attention to, especially that sense that, art is a personal thing sometimes. So I think it's just tweaking it. I don't think it's easier or harder.
I figured. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Jeff.